Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Exploiting Outlook Remote Code Execution, a deep dive into SecTor's 2025 Signature of Destruction. My name is Brad LaPorte, the Chief Marketing Officer at Morphisec, and I will be your moderator for today. And with someone that's spent years in the trenches in cybersecurity, I'm thrilled to guide you through this critical conversation of one of the most pressing threats that's facing organizations today. Outlook remote code execution vulnerabilities continue to evolve into major threat vectors, with attackers leveraging roaming signatures and cloud-based settings to exploit enterprises in new and sophisticated ways. And today's session is all about demystifying these attacks, understanding vulnerabilities behind them, and most importantly, learning how to protect your organization. We are privileged to have with us one of the brightest minds in cybersecurity, Michael Gorelik, Morphisec's Chief Technology Officer and Head of Malware Research. Michael is globally recognized expert in vulnerability research and incident response, and collaborating with amazing organizations such as the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Homeland Security to combat global cybercrime. Followed by his presentation at SecTor 2025, Michael will take us into a deep dive into recent vulnerabilities, as well as several CVEs and their implications on enterprise security. So, what to expect from today? A breakdown in the anatomy of Outlook exploits, an exploration of roaming signature vulnerabilities, why they've become a target, and how attackers are using them, an actual live demonstration of real-world attack scenarios, and then actionable recommendations to secure your organization against these threats. So, before we begin, just a quick housekeeping note. Feel free to submit questions in the Q&A panel in this session at any point during this webinar. And we'll address as many as we can in the live Q&A at the end. With that, it's my pleasure to hand things over to the one and only Michael Gorelik to kick off this deep dive. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brad. Again, it's a pleasure, as always, to present to the audience about the new research. And as Brad mentioned, this is a summary or a look into the research that we presented at the SecTor, Black Hat Canada. Hopefully, maybe we'll also be able to share even more information because some things have been discovered and basically identified by Microsoft as important even post this presentation. So I think there will be a couple of additional. So first things first, as Brad mentioned, we need to recap our previous year presentations just because this is the basis of our discoveries today. So the previous year we presented at DEF CON a bunch of RCEs with the objective of showing that Microsoft, as any other vendor, basically, when they are going to patch a vulnerability, they are under pressure. They have the urgency to patch it quickly, rightfully so. With a very small disclosure time lead of around 3 months, and as a result, they do mistakes as any other. And as a researcher, we are the good guys. We can easily identify additional control flows, find additional vulnerabilities, and as an attacker, you can do that all your day for yourself. So at the DEF CON, we presented a bunch of vulnerabilities. They were patched. We found a bypass. We presented those blue hat. And then later, we haven't presented that yet at the SecTor. We continued with additional vulnerability with the same domain. Then, just before the highlight of the show, before we talk about roaming signatures, we need to talk about the settings. What are the roaming settings that Microsoft basically synchronizes between the different accounts? Why do you need them? How do you do that? API, etc. And then to the highlight of the show, we'll talk about signatures, those little small letters at the end of the email, right? It sounds harmless, CEO, CTO, just IT director, but they are harmless, and they can lead to a full remote code execution. So we'll talk about that. And then obviously the demonstrations Brad mentioned, we'll talk about the patching. Microsoft approached this time the patching. We gave them enough lead time to do that the right way. Okay. So, is authentication necessary means safe? Unfortunately, in the world today, there's a false sense of security, of safety, let's call it like that. Many of the victims and people that use different services, whether those are emails or any other stuff, they feel like the authentication is the hardest barrier. So if you're using a good authentication, there's no reason for attackers to succeed, do anything bad. Unfortunately, many vendors feel the same, think the same, even provide award bounties the same. Got almost twice the bounties. Do not invest into security, or do not invest enough into security post the authentication state. And as a result, you get a situation in which if you get authenticated, it's basically game over. It's game over. You can escalate, you can do crazy stuff. And in reality, authentication, like I'm doing a lot of IR, and I see in reality authentication, there are a lot of authentication, safe authentication techniques, but unfortunately, most of the people are not applying them. Some are without MFAs. Some apply MFA on a very weak device like SMS. Some are like doing MFA, but not FIDO2, obviously, or very few are using devices. And the attacks on the authentication are just endless, starting from stealing credentials to brute forcing to social engineering to coercing a person to give away authentication. So authentication today, if you look at the organization, it's very easy to get. At least 2-3 employees will give away their authentication for free. So now the question, given an authentication and access to an email box, right, a mailbox, which is relatively easy to get, can you execute a malicious code on the end devices of the victim? And this is exactly what we are going to demonstrate. All or most of our research, both the previous year and this year, were surrounding, given you have already authenticated and you have the credentials to the mailbox, how can you execute malicious code and escalate within the organization, execute it on any device of that victim? Sounds scary, right? And sounds also quite complicated. And as you can see, you will see here today, it's not as complicated. And unfortunately, for most of the people, it can be extremely easy. Okay? So, back to recap, we'll do that very quick. Overall, we are planning running over the presentation. Previous year, we presented a bunch of remote code executions that, given authentication, given the credentials, you can execute this malicious code as a malicious forms. I remind what is form. Form, in a way, it's in a user interface that basically comes to render, present, execute functionality of different Outlook items. So form is something grayish. When you get the email, you get that different figures in your Outlook, and you can fill those and change those. But user form. This is just one type of form for an email. You have calendar invites. Those are also forms that represent calendar invites. You have reminders. You have tasks. They are also forms for that purpose. So there are a lot of forms, and they are rich with functionality. They can do quite a lot. And in the previous year, we presented how a custom form, because people can actually generate their own forms, custom form can be used and abused to execute malicious code. NetSpy was the first one, the group that was the first one to find vulnerability that allows to generate a custom form and kind of mislead the Outlook to execute as if it's a built-in form. It basically gave it a path with a class ID, and Outlook thought that it's basically a legit built-in form and execute that. The problem was a relative path. But the biggest point here is that the exchange was the one to synchronize and inject those custom forms everywhere. Because if you customize, let's say, how you receive your email and how do you look at the email, you want all your devices to work the same way. And so the attackers abuse that. They create custom forms, and essentially Exchange is the one to inject those custom forms in the environments. Because our theme in the previous year was how do you find bypass to those patches. We found very quickly that Microsoft patched this vulnerability by looking at the relative path of the class ID. So we found a way on how we can, instead of relative path, we can use a built-in auto execution of com and add a suffix. A suffix kind of looks harmless, a small suffix of a backslash. We found that functions, built-in functions like registry create, etc. in Microsoft disregard those backslashes. And as a result, you have here a harmless custom form executing on the environment, bypassing the patch of Microsoft. So we presented a number of those vulnerabilities because we had a cycle of every 3 months new vulnerability, every time new bypass. Later, we found we presented Blue Hat after DEF CON, after they patched the suffix. We found a way how to still execute it by basically using a known class IDs of, let's say, Explorer or any other objects that you have on your device, then replacing their rendering operation. So if you open something with Explorer, instead of that, you have your command executed. And because Outlook didn't validate, it basically overridden the, if such exists, overridden this auto spawn execution, and we had a lull bin, basically execution of malicious code without even having any files on the system. Quite dangerous. It worked, and after that, Microsoft obviously patched it. You notice that the message class, IPM, node, hijack, it's basically the form that is responsible for the email system. So we gave it the custom name hijack. And finally, this wasn't presented at the previous year, DEF CON and Blue Hat, but obviously we wanted Microsoft to finalize and provide a full patch for every possible control flow that we at least found. And we found by way of mini fuzzing to get a memory exploitation that leads to remote code execution. While the previous vulnerabilities were all logical, at some point logic it becomes difficult, and you need to use machine or AI or any other tools. We actually used for that purpose also partially AI. And for that purpose, we basically needed to see what kind of additional custom forms that we can generate that can just lead to unexpected behavior. And when an unexpected behavior happens and there is a crash, if this crash can be controlled, you see that you can move where it crashes. Basically, it's controlling the instruction pointer, it's called in the technical term. Then in a way you can achieve code execution. You can execute your own gadgets and inject shellcodes, etc. So in this case, we basically understood that there are some built-in forms, like a recall form, in which you send a message, you ask the victim to recall the message, and there is a special form responsible for that purpose that is doing all the recall, deleting the mails um, from the mailboxes. It doesn't even need to be relevant to whether the exchange. But we thought, why wouldn't we create our own custom form and impersonate a recall form? So we basically use the same class ID, the same message class with different class ID. In a way, we created our own recall, and this led to dangling pointer and a crash eventually, which wasn't validated. And later, this was patched as well. Okay, so we're done with the basically recap. The point I wanted to get from this recap is that we utilize a very serious functionality that Exchange provides for usability by the fact that Exchange synchronizes those objects, those forms for your convenience between your clients so that you can work centrally. Exchange essentially is the one to inject that malicious objects to your clients. We're just creating them. Exchange is the one to inject them. So during this year, we thought, what additional things can the exchange inject for us, right? What kind of things do we need for convenience? And we just looked at the outlook and we saw this huge variety of attack surface. We had to deal with them. So we looked at the different objects, calendar filters, application bars, different time zones, right? All those things need to be synchronized between your clients. They have to be represented somehow. So those are settings, and we call it roaming settings because they roam between the different clients, and they are basically synchronized by the exchange itself, right? The settings have to be stored in one place. In this case, they are stored in a storage. You can check out 2017 YouTube presentation for Substrate cloud storage that Microsoft utilizes to synchronize and save all those settings and other things. Today, if you look at the different APIs that your web browsers or your web clients work, they communicate with outlook.office.com. Those are essentially the same. You can write into one, you can read from the another, they are the same. When you are debugging or reverse engineering your Outlook clients, the old the old applications, they will work with Substrate. Okay, so now we know that we have a central storage. We know that we have so many different settings that Microsoft have to synchronize between all your clients. We need to find interesting settings. How can you check out what are the different settings? We'll show in the next slide. But very important to see that when you are analyzing and understanding how Outlook communicates with the exchange to fetch those settings, to synchronize those settings, they use this API. OWS v1 Outlook Cloud settings account, or without the account for global settings. For example, settings that will change how your Outlook look like. Those are global settings, settings that impact the email itself or the account settings. Get is getting the settings from the cloud storage, patch is changing updating those settings, and delete, obviously removing those settings from the cloud. You can find the same API within the Outlook applications executables. So this basically supported by both cloud browsers and applications. You can check out special path locations on the registry of your clients. You can find plenty of interesting settings there. Some settings are more interesting, others are less interesting. Obviously, settings like booleans and integers are less interesting because, again, what can you do to control them? Not too much, unless you want to try some kind of overflow. We were interested in more structural settings that represent the strings and objects. So that led us eventually to roaming signatures. And this would be the topic of the rest of this talk or presentation, demonstration. Roaming settings is just one of those settings. Again, there's a bigger attack surface, as I just presented, overall settings. Roaming signatures are those signatures that you leave at the end of the email, right? At least theoretically, those are just characters that you add at the end of the email. But it's more advanced than that. Email is represented usually as something like an HTML. A roaming signature can have images, or signature overall can have images, can have links, can have visit card. So it's more complex than just a couple of characters, right? To support that functionality, those signatures are represented as an objects, a bigger object. HTML objects, RTF objects, or even textual objects in case you don't want this blow up functionality. Now, just a couple of words for signatures overall. It sounds like, okay, they are dangerous. Why wouldn't I use them, right? Well, signatures are actually very important. You can find dozens of different Reddit messages. Organizations need to have a centralized brand for all their employees. They need to manage those signatures. And for the long time, for many years, IT members were looking, how do they synchronize those signatures? How do you add a new employee and have them written organization X, right? And present your icon, it's quite complex. You need to access all the mailboxes. You need to implement that and create that setting. It's quite complicated if Microsoft doesn't support it centrally. So a while ago, before 2022 or even later, because roaming signatures were initially not very functional, there were a lot of companies, there are still some companies that basically do that management for you. One of the issues with those companies, at least with regard to different ITs and post Reddits, is that they need to pull those emails to change them. So no one wants to give away their emails. So Microsoft finally in 2022 provided the tool, the option for IT to manage signatures through that API that I described before, cloud settings. You could basically generate, change that, update that as any other setting. A signature is a setting which need to be synchronized among the different clients. They did not plan, and they are not planning to provide it as part of the Microsoft Graph, the big robust Microsoft Graph that supports a lot of the functionalities today and services in Microsoft. I believe because of just avoiding a larger attack surface, but I really don't know. It's just a fact. So a lot of those IT people that wanted to manage that using code, they just worked with that API, the same API that I presented before, to set up those signatures for each and every employee. Okay, great. You essentially don't have to have those. You can disable roaming signatures and then go back to the original situation in which you need to somehow manage it by yourself. But if you do by default manage them centrally through roaming signatures, you can set up your signatures as a person or as a private person, or give away the functionality to your IT. How do you set up your signatures? If you're using your Outlook client, you basically have the option under the account. You have mail, as you see here, signatures, and then you can create your own signatures. If you are within your client, you essentially can create HTML signatures, RTF signatures, TXT signatures, but they are limited to, no, they actually are supporting all HTML, RTF, and TXT. You can add business cards that will be represented as any of those things. How signature is being added to your email is really dependent on how do you decide to render your email. There is a different setting, also roaming, that as you see here on top, compose messages in the format of HTML. By default, all mails are rendered as HTML. If the email is HTML, it will take the signatures that will be generated as HTML and append it inside. But you can change this component messages in the format of RTF or TXT. Smaller, maybe smaller attack surface, but not as nice looking. But then the right signature need to be appended. For that to work, for that mechanism to work, every time you create a new signature, there are actually signatures generated for HTML, RTF, and TXT, just to support that rendering and so that you can choose any method you want, it will get the right signature. Great. What is the API? I mentioned that the global API still works, right? The OWS V1 Outlook Cloud Settings account. And I mentioned that the signature is as any other setting. Setting is represented as a JSON in this case. And as you see, we have a roaming setting. The type is roaming setting as any other setting. And then we need to define what is the name of the signature, right? What does it have as a value, right? And what is the type? And I mentioned that at least on the client side, we can create HTML, TF, TXT. Actually, on the browsers, you just create HTML and TXT. So how do we change that if we want to use API instead of this nice GUI? So we send basically a JSON, and the JSON will say, okay, this is our name, test signature, this is our type, and then the value is essentially HTML, right? It's the HTML. So we can put there anything we like, including links and nice images, and this will look exactly like we saw in the UI, right? Okay. How is it synchronizes right now to the client? So we generated right now a new signature. Is it always fetched again and again for every email we compose? Every email that we reply? No, for optimization purposes, Microsoft said, okay, why would we like get this very complex structures, which could be a very much complex, right? Signature can be quite a complex HTML file. So I said, let's put those files onto the machine, and then every time you get your emails, reply to your emails, depending on what is the setting, and it's also a roaming setting. How do you define to reply? Define to reply by what signature? This by itself is a setting, but let's put it aside for a second. So which signature to fetch, what signature to fetch. So those signatures are basically saved on the special folder, as you would expect, roaming under the user profile, Microsoft signatures. And you can find here for every new signature, HTML, RTF, TXT. For some, you see just HTML, just because I played with that. And essentially, you can do that. You can delete stuff. You can add stuff here. This is an accessible, interesting location. Check it out. You will see a lot of your signatures stored here. Okay, so RCE. So you would imagine initially, you say, okay, this is an HTML. It's a setting. What can we do with that? The first thing you would think, okay, we can push somewhere like cross-site, right? XSS. That's the first thing any initial attacker or hacker would think of. Where can I push this alert or XSS? So you would think, okay, value is an HTML. Let's put it there. Well, as we found out, this is not the main one. It's actually vulnerability and was classified, unfortunately, as moderate. But it wasn't the main one, because this doesn't necessarily, it leads to XSS. It could execute on the browser, but we wanted to execute that as a file on the end device, and we found that if we modify the name of the signature, Microsoft actually doesn't validate the characters in that case of the names. So we could push a path as a name, basically reference path or directory traversal code like that. And when Microsoft will append the signature with the path to save it into the location of the end system, it will save it wherever we want. And that's exactly what we got. We got Exchange synchronizing the settings, the file signature, into the location where Outlook were writing directly into the startup folder. So great. So we have right now HTML file in the startup folder, and the value is also not sanitized, right? So we could even alert or execute more interesting, sophisticated code. And as a result, we had execution. Is that the only execution? We succeeded to do that the same with RTFs, because you can automatically execute RTF. It's in the startup folder. You can make it open. And we used our previous CVEs to show how through URL monikers you can execute malicious code remotely from RTF. So this worked both for RTF and JavaScript. For TXT, it's less relevant because it's, and this was evaluated as high, but because again we need authentication to be able to create signature, we got half the bounty that you would originally, a bit more than half. Okay, great. Microsoft went to patch it, and this time we provided enough time, as you would expect. They on the website they validated and added validation for all those special characters to the names, and you have nice error messages that basically represent hey, you shouldn't do that. For to avoid like RTF executions, they also wrapped the scripts with divs, so even if you have like something auto executed, this will not be auto executed because of the div. They added sanitization later so that you'll not have things malicious things like alerts and or auto start in the HTMLs. And a couple of additional things on the client's side. They done a lot of changes over the time, but the main change is that they finally add sanitization for file name. They validate the file names, and they do not have special characters, and they crash, basically lead to crash if there is something that bypassed, and in the result you have like non-valid characters. There was some validation before, but it was validation only if the escaping fails, which usually will not fail. Okay, this is just an example of some of the characters that are being validated. Less interesting for our purpose right now. But again, there's quite a good sanitization that was added. The path itself, just to avoid appending some directory traversal path to the original Microsoft Outlook path, right? The signatures is just after Outlook. They said, okay, instead of giving the name and appending signatures to the path and then appending to the signatures the file name, let's create our own special folder. Let's use special API to fetch directly the signatures path instead of appending it every time. And this way we'll avoid directory traversal. This is an example of a change of a function which had before appended signatures. Now it doesn't, because we pulled a path of signatures prior to that. Okay, so let's demonstrate very quickly how it works. Just a second. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah. Let's see. Brad, do you see my screen?
Yep. Yep. I see it.
Okay.
Settings. Yep. Other.
Okay, cool. So right now we are an attacker that goes into the account signatures, and instead of using API, we're generating that signature directly through the Outlook browser, as you see here. We're intercepting the same request in burp, and in burp you will find the same Outlook cloud setting as you see. In this case, we are showing with beta. It works also with V1, OWS beta Outlook cloud settings, and then we'll see that setting that we just generated in the browser duplicated here, exactly what we intercepted in the burp. Now we're going to change that, modify our signature through burp. We are going to modify the name of the signatures that we just generated, the my signature, and we are going to use the patch API. Remember, patch is editing versus get is just getting. We'll change the value to alert, and then we'll also change the RTF value to auto execute as well. This is a because again, as I mentioned, browser automatically generates HTML and TXT. Doesn't support DF, but doesn't mean that we cannot do that through API. You will notice that the API doesn't limit us. We can generate anything we want. And here we had a success. Now we will check. So it's generated, it being stored into the cloud storage. It's one of the issues with that is that we can store anything we want, and you will see as a red teamer this works even if some sanitization is being added. So it's not necessarily may today renderize on your end client, but still you can use that storage for that purpose. So here we have a victim that's waiting for that signature to be uploaded. You can obviously restart Outlook, then it will fetch the signatures. You can move between focus you and not focus you. It will do the same, generate and fetch those signatures. At some point, Outlook has to synchronize, right, with the Exchange. Exchange pushes that signatures to Outlook. Outlook will append the paths and will write right now the signatures into the startup folder. And as we see here, we have an HTML and RTF signature that we just synchronized, updated, and the pawn is there. So if we will restart the computer, this will execute. So we have a successful demo here, full RCE. If you updated your clients, this will not work anymore. If you didn't update the clients, Microsoft patched that also on the website, so it still shouldn't work. So you should be safe, at least for that with that setting. Back to still a couple of open issues. For those that want more to research the cloud, the signatures. As I mentioned, you really can go and utilize that API of roaming settings with signatures almost as much as you want. You can create many signatures with one API. Those will generate a lot of files. If those files are HTML, RTF, or TXT, you can generate other types, secondary types, which are not there. They will not be dropped to your client, they will not be rendered, but they will be stored, so you can get them, you can fetch them. So a red teamer can utilize that for purpose of saving a persistent code into the Microsoft Cloud using a legitimate Microsoft API to fetch his next stage execution. Somehow we have a cut down here on the slide, but a couple of additional things. So one of the things that we found out, and I'll see if I have the other slide, is that again the HTML itself that appends the signature also has its own API, create item it's called, and you can modify that as well. Instead of modifying the signature, you can modify the whole email. When we found a vulnerability that was recently patched, so we can disclose it. In fact, that you can basically generate those HTML with auto-spawning tags, meta tags, move and audio. So that movie is for move is for a movie, and as a result, you can send those emails to mobile devices, and mobile devices will automatically execute those content. So we could basically modify those HTMLs to any of those tags. Those tags didn't go through sanitization. The Outlook client on mobile devices spawned them automatically, and we succeeded to get all the information of the client anywhere with zero click. So you don't even need to open the email. The email will be previewed by your client, and you don't have to be trusted. So this was patched also around 2 months ago, um, and we essentially finalized our research on the settings. Brad, do you want
Mhm.
to mention? Are there any additional questions from the public?
Yeah, let me just see what we have in the questions here. Just give me a second. All right, first one in the shoot here. Um, what proactive steps can we take against AI-driven or automated exploitation of these vulnerabilities? So protect against future attacks.
Yeah, I mean, I expect more and more of those. I already see much quicker development of vulnerabilities with the help of the AI. There are actually some colleagues of mine that utilize that, and there are some other companies that use AI and find uh, dozens, if not hundreds, of such vulnerabilities. Um, it's actually a good thing because it helps the different vendors to patch quicker. Unfortunately, they don't have the resources just to patch it so quick. So a lot of resources are allocated there, but attackers are doing the same. They're leveraging the same AI tools, um, but maybe without the guardrails like Worm GPT or utilized by Worm GPT. Um, and they do the same, and they generate those vulnerabilities, and we see ransomwares like the Enclope case, in which those vulnerabilities are very quickly weaponized and abused for infiltration and detonation, for initial access and then lateral movement, and eventually ransomware delivery or advanced IP theft delivery. Um, so with this advanced technology, as personally, I see that you have two ways to fight, three ways to fight it back. So one, you can weaponize AI against AI, and let's hope that your AI will be stronger and faster. Um, it could be. Just take into account that those criminals have much more time for their use and much more motivation. So there will definitely be a lot of vendors that will produce AI for the security of AI. Another way is hardening your environment as much as you can so that no one will get in. But then it becomes very challenging. It becomes very difficult for your employees to manage within that environment. You cannot go fully air gapped. You cannot be isolated. So, assuming you can do all those hardening, then great. Then don't use the Microsoft Exchange, and don't use the outlooks that synchronize it from outside and manage everything within. But really, it's theoretical, right? Uh, and then the third way is obviously using a different technology, not one that tries to detect patterns, but using a more innovative approach, a deception approach in our case, like moving target defense approach, in which the AI itself need to predict what is the attack surface, how Outlook look like, what are the APIs that need to be exploited. But imagine those are changed continuously. The attack surface continuously changes. Now, it doesn't have to be a morphisec deception, right? You can use other deception concept, but the whole point is that you leverage different thinking, different mindset. You are trying to make your environment unpredictable, make your behavior outlook unpredictable. AI are very quickly will be confused with that regard. So it will be a fine, and most probably it's a combination of things. You need your AI on your defense side. You need your monitoring and regulation compliance. You need deception, finding ransomers, and protecting against those advanced exploits by basically leveraging deception. It's exactly what we do in memory, right? So it's a combination of those things. Hope it helps, but it will be continuous fight in the near time future, at least in the near 2 to 5 years.
All right. That was a very thorough answer. Thank you very much. And then, so the next one I have is what lessons can we take from these vulnerabilities to improve our overall vulnerability management and security programs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, managing vulnerabilities is important, and patching it as quick as possible is also important. Today, we know that weaponizing a vulnerability from discovery to full weaponization takes around 18 minutes. Um, it's tough. I don't know too many IT people that know how to patch within 18 minutes all their all their enterprise
Definitely.
environment. Um, so you obviously want to have a proactive defense, proactive solutions that will buy you time until you patch. And the most important is that first month. So a combination of having as proactive solutions to buy you time, protect you against the exploitation of those critical vulnerabilities, in parallel to patching as quick as possible. And again, patching is a full theory by itself. You need to have a dedicated resources. You need to have a full inventory of your assets. For even you start patching, you need to have visibility. How do you have visibility when you don't know all your assets, right? So you need to know all your assets. You need to have the right inventories. You need to have software inventories, device inventories. Um, you need to understand what are the applications that are really critical. Outlook is being used by every employee in the company, so yeah, it's critical, right? Some application, I don't know, let's say, I don't know, team viewer vulnerability. Okay, it has a vulnerability. No one cares, right? Really. Why? Because the attack surface is not large enough. Attackers not necessarily targeting a team viewer. It not necessarily always runs within your environment. Hackers will target those applications that will give them the biggest opportunity. Okay, this could be your firewall, your gateways, but this could be also your application that you use on a daily basis, right? Um, so again, understanding your asset, prioritizing your assets, understanding the risk that comes from the asset, patching those assets, and having complementary controls that will buy you time until you patch. This is the general approach I would take.
All right. Time for one more question. So, last but not least, how can we ensure our security investments in tools like endpoint detection response, EDR, remain effective against evolving threats like these?
I mean, the EDR is important to have. EDR will be there. They're developing, but they need to do everything, right? They need to fight the insider, the reputation, the signatures, the vulnerabilities is just one piece of what they need to do. So, having a single solution and hoping that it will solve all your problems. I think most have already understood that it's not the right approach, right? It's important to have a layered approach, a layered defense solution approach. Um, while the EDR provides a good response for after the fact, a lot of times when you have already found out some of the incidents, the proactive prevention is very minimized. What is layered approach? You want to invest into the prevention, proactive prevention early enough, and you want to stop those attacks as early as possible so that the response will be minimized. The more you shift to the response, the more you have impact on your organization, right? If you do not stop that vulnerability at the moment it exploits, then you will need to remediate much more. And the longer it takes, again, you have a risk of losing your IP, re-imaging your devices, recovering from backups, rebuilding your enterprise, and blah 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 blah. A lot of things. So you want to do that early. Uh, so I would definitely have a security stack that have that EDRs. One of the big three, I would suppose, that they're having a good monitoring for purposes of finding what is the zero patient, going over the different events. This is EDR, and this is exactly why you need that to prevent that attack as early as possible, to buy you time and minimize the impact on hunting and incident response. You have to have a proactive defense. Um, vulnerabilities, for ransomware, for IP theft and exfiltration, right? Those are kind of the big pillars.
All right. So if we bring this home, key takeaways, everything that we've talked about here, obviously patch immediately, disable and limit roaming signatures until they're validated, monitoring, sync anomalies in your system, specifically SIM, EDR, and other specific tools. And then defense in depth. So, basically multi-factor authentication, least privilege. And then last but not least, investing in preventative approaches like automated moving target defense. Certainly at Morphisec, we're here to help and help mitigate against attacks like this to future-proof your organization. And so, Michael, thank you so much for this thorough briefing. This has been amazing. This has been recorded, so this will be available for to be rewatched. And please stay tuned for our next event and future events, and definitely head over to morphisec.com to learn more. Thank you.
Thank you.